The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty auction yard as Baxley Thornton adjusted his weathered Stetson and surveyed the sorry collection of livestock before him. As one of Montana's most successful cattle ranchers, he'd built his empire on shrewd judgment and an eye for quality horseflesh. What he saw today made him shake his head in disgust. Pathetic, he muttered, watching a mangy mare stumble past, her ribs showing through patchy fur. That's when he spotted her, an elderly woman with silver hair braided down her back, leading what could only be described as the most pitiful excuse for a horse he'd ever seen. The animal was so thin its bones seemed ready to pierce through its dull coat, its head hanging low, as if it had given up on life itself. One eye was clouded with cataracts, and it moved with the painful shuffle of the aged and broken. Baxley's companions, fellow ranchers who'd gathered for the monthly livestock auction, began to snicker. "Well, I'll be damned," chuckled Garrison Whitmore, his beer belly jiggling as he laughed. "Someone actually brought that bag of bones to sell." The old woman, who introduced herself simply as Cordelia to the auctioneer, stood with quiet dignity beside her horse. Her clothes were worn but clean, her hands gnarled with arthritis but gentle as she stroked the animal's neck. When the auctioneer asked for her starting price, she whispered something that made him lean in closer. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the yard, "we have here let's call it a project horse. The owner is asking for $1. Just $1 to give this animal a chance." The laughter that erupted from the crowd was immediate and cruel. Baxley found himself joining in, his voice booming above the others. "Hell, I wouldn't take that glue factory reject for free." He shouted, causing another wave of laughter. "Lady, you'd have to pay me to haul that thing away." Cordelia's weathered face remained impassive, but Baxley caught the slight tightening around her eyes. She whispered something to her horse, and for a moment, the animal lifted its head, fixing its one good eye on Baxley with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. $1 going once?" the auctioneer called half-heartedly. "Going twice? I'll take him." A small voice piped up from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned to see Maverick Caldwell, Baxley's 17-year-old ranch hand, stepping forward with a crumpled dollar bill in his hand. The boy was known for his gentle way with animals and his inability to turn away from anything in need. "Don't be a fool, kid," Baxley barked. "That horse ain't worth the bullet it'd take to put it out of its misery." But Maverick was already walking toward the old woman, his dollar extended. Cordelia accepted it with a grateful nod, then leaned close to whisper something in the boy's ear. Her words were lost in the wind, but Baxley saw the youth's eyes widen with surprise. As Maverick led the decrepit horse away, Baxley called out one final insult. "Hope you got a good shovel, boy. You're gonna need it real soon." The crowd dispersed, but Cordelia remained, watching Maverick disappear into the distance with her horse. When she finally turned to leave, she paused beside Baxley's truck, her ancient eyes meeting his with a look that seemed to see straight through him. "Some things," she said quietly, "are worth far more than they appear, Mr. Thornton. Perhaps you'll remember that." 3 days later, Baxley was reviewing cattle prices in his office when Maverick knocked on the door. The boy's face was flushed with excitement, his eyes bright with something Baxley had never seen before. "Mr. Thornton, sir, you need to come see this," Maverick said, practically bouncing on his toes. Baxley didn't look up from his ledger. "If it's about that sorry excuse for a horse you bought, I don't want to hear it. Just bury it when it dies and don't come crying to me about the vet bills." "That's just it, sir. He's not dying, he's different." Something in the boy's voice made Baxley glance up. Maverick's face held an expression of wonder mixed with confusion, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd witnessed. "Different how?" Baxley asked, his interest piqued despite himself. "You have to see it to believe it, sir, please." Against his better judgment, Baxley followed Maverick out to the small pasture behind the barn where they'd been keeping the old horse. What he saw made him stop dead in his tracks. The horse, whom Maverick had named Sage, was standing in the center of the field, no longer the broken-down creature from the auction. While still thin, There was something different about his posture, an alertness that hadn't been there before. His one good eye was fixed on a small herd of cattle that had somehow broken through the fence from the adjacent field. "Watch this," Maverick whispered. As they observed, Sage began to move. It wasn't the painful shuffle Baxley remembered, but a purposeful, almost ethereal glide across the grass. The horse positioned himself between the cattle and an open gate, then began what could only be described as a dance. Baxley had been around horses his entire life, had seen the best cutting horses in the country work cattle, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed next. Sage moved with an intelligence and grace that defied his appearance, reading the cattle's intentions before they even moved, positioning himself with mathematical precision to guide them exactly where they needed to go. "How long has he been doing this?" Baxley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Started yesterday," Maverick replied. "At first I thought it was just coincidence, but then I brought him some of your prize bulls that got loose near the highway. He herded them back, like they were his own calves." Baxley watched in fascination as Sage completed his work, guiding the last of the cattle through the gate, with movements so subtle they were almost invisible. The horse's technique was unlike anything he'd ever seen. No running, no dramatic cutting maneuvers, just an almost supernatural ability to communicate with the animals through body language alone. "There's more," Maverick said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Yesterday, when that storm rolled through, he led all the horses in the main pasture to high ground 20 minutes before the flash flood hit. It's like he knew." Baxley felt a chill run down his spine. In 30 years of ranching, he'd never seen anything like this. The horse's abilities seemed to transcend normal animal behavior, bordering on the impossible. "Have you told anyone else about this?" he asked. Maverick shook his head. "Figured you'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy." As they stood watching, Sage turned his head toward them, that one good eye seeming to look right through Baxley. For a moment, the rancher felt as if the horse could see every cruel word he'd spoken at the auction, every moment of mockery and derision. Then the horse did something that made Baxley's blood run cold. He nodded, just once, as if acknowledging the man's thoughts. "Get back to work," Baxley said abruptly, turning away from the pasture. "And don't go spreading tales about some magic horse. People will think we've lost our minds." But as he walked back toward the house, Baxley couldn't shake the feeling that Sage was still watching him, still seeing something in him that he wasn't ready to face. Word traveled fast in ranching communities, and within a week, Baxley's ranch was buzzing with visitors. Despite his orders to keep quiet, Maverick had been unable to resist sharing Sage's remarkable abilities with a few friends, and soon every rancher within 50 miles was making excuses to drop by. Baxley found himself in the uncomfortable position of denying what everyone could see with their own eyes. Sage's gift for working cattle was undeniable, but it went beyond mere skill. It was as if the horse possessed an otherworldly understanding of animal behavior that bordered on the supernatural. "I'm telling you, Bax," said Garrison Whitmore, who'd driven over from his neighboring ranch that morning. "That horse just moved my entire herd of Angus from the north pasture to the south without breaking a sweat. Took him 15 minutes to do what would take my best hands 3 hours." Baxley grunted non-committally, but inside, his mind was racing. The financial implications were staggering. If Sage could work cattle with this level of efficiency, the savings in labor costs alone would be enormous. But there was something else, something that made him deeply uncomfortable about the whole situation. That afternoon, he decided to test the horse himself. He selected his most difficult bull, a massive Brahmin named Goliath, who'd injured 2 cowboys the month before. The animal was notoriously aggressive and had never been successfully moved without multiple riders and specialized equipment. "Bring that old nag out here," Baxley called to Maverick. "Let's see what he can really do." Maverick led Sage into the pen, where Goliath stood pawing the ground, his massive head lowered menacingly. The bull had already spotted the horse and was clearly agitated, snorting and preparing to charge. "This is insane," muttered one of the ranch hands. "That bull's gonna kill that horse." But Sage showed no fear. The old horse simply stood at the gate, his one good eye fixed on Goliath with calm intensity. Then, without warning, he began to move. What happened next defied every law of physics and animal behavior that Baxley understood. Sage didn't run or dodge. He simply walked toward the bull with steady, measured steps. As he approached, something extraordinary occurred. Goliath's aggressive posture began to change. The bull's head rose, his ears shifted forward, and his entire demeanor transformed from hostile to curious. Within moments, the bull was following Sage around the pen like a docile puppy, responding to the horse's subtle movements with an obedience that left every observer speechless. When Sage moved toward the gate, Goliath followed without question. When the horse stopped, the bull stopped. It was as if some invisible force connected them. "Sweet Jesus," Garrison whispered. "How is that possible?" Baxley couldn't answer. His worldview, built on decades of experience and practical knowledge, was crumbling before his eyes. This wasn't just an exceptionally skilled cutting horse. This was something beyond natural explanation. That evening, as the sun set over the Montana plains, Baxley found himself alone with Sage in the pasture. The horse stood quietly, grazing on the sparse grass, seemingly oblivious to the chaos his abilities had caused. "Just who are you?" Baxley asked aloud, feeling foolish for talking to an animal. Sage raised his head, fixing that penetrating gaze on the rancher once more. In that moment, Baxley could have sworn he saw something ancient and wise looking back at him, something that understood far more than any horse should. The memory of Cordelia's words came flooding back. Some things are worth far more than they appear. For the first time since the auction, Baxley began to wonder if there was more to the old woman's story than he'd realized. As he walked back to the house, one question haunted him. What exactly had Maverick purchased for that $1, and why did Baxley have the growing feeling that he'd been the biggest fool at that auction? The phone call came at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Baxley was barely awake when his housekeeper, Ingrid, knocked on his bedroom door. "Mr. Thornton, there's a woman on the phone for you, says it's about the horse." Baxley's heart skipped a beat. Somehow he knew it was Cordelia before he even picked up the receiver. "Mr. Thornton," her voice was soft but carried an authority that made him straighten unconsciously. "I believe it's time we talked." An hour later, Cordelia sat in Baxley's kitchen, her weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked older than he remembered, more fragile, but her eyes held the same depth that had unsettled him at the auction. "You have questions," she said simply. "Damn right I do," Baxley replied, his voice rougher than intended. "That horse, what you sold that boy, it ain't natural." Cordelia smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Natural is a relative term, Mr. Thornton. Sage is as natural as the wind or the rain. He's just different. Different how? And don't give me any mystical nonsense. I'm a practical man." "Are you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "A practical man who's built his life around understanding animals, yet refuses to accept what he sees with his own eyes?" Baxley felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I see a horse that can do things horses can't do. I want to know how." Cordelia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Sage was born on my ranch 37 years ago. From the moment he drew breath, he was special. He could communicate with animals in ways I'd never seen. Not just horses, all animals. Birds would land on his back, wild deer would graze beside him. Even the most vicious dogs would become gentle in his presence." 37 years? Baxley's voice was skeptical. "Lady, that horse is ancient. He should be dead by now." "Should be," she agreed. "But Sage has always existed by his own rules. He's given me more than 3 decades of the most extraordinary companionship anyone could ask for. He's saved my ranch more times than I can count, prevented disasters, protected my livestock from predators, even guided lost children home during blizzards." Baxley leaned back in his chair, studying her face for signs of deception. "If he's so valuable, why sell him for $1? The question hung in the air between them. Cordelia's expression grew sad, and for the first time, Baxley saw the full weight of her years. "Because it was time," she said simply. "Sage has a gift, Mr. Thornton, but it comes with a price. He chooses his own path, his own purpose. For 37 years he chose to stay with me, but recently he's been restless, looking toward the horizon as if waiting for something. Waiting for what? I don't know, but I suspect it has something to do with your young ranch hand. Maverick has something special about him, a gentleness, a connection to animals that reminds me of myself at that age. Sage saw it too. Baxley felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying this horse chose to come here? I'm saying Sage goes where he's needed most. And apparently, he's needed here. Before Baxley could respond, Maverick burst through the kitchen door, his face flushed with excitement and terror. Mr. Thornton, you need to come quick. There's been an accident on the highway. A cattle truck overturned and there's livestock scattered across 3 lanes of traffic. The sheriff's asking for help, but it's chaos out there. The animals are spooked and dangerous, and he stopped mid-sentence, noticing Cordelia for the first time. Ma'am, he said, tipping his hat respectfully. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got an emergency. Cordelia stood slowly, her joints creaking with age. No need to apologize, young man. I think this is exactly why I'm here. She turned to Baxley, her eyes holding a knowledge that made him uncomfortable. Some things, Mr. Thornton, are worth far more than they appear. Today, you'll understand exactly what that means. As the 3 of them hurried toward the door, Baxley couldn't shake the feeling that everything, the auction, Sage's abilities, even this conversation, had all been leading to whatever was waiting for them on that highway. The scene on Highway 89 was pure chaos. The overturned cattle truck lay on its side like a beached whale, diesel fuel pooling beneath it while smoke billowed from the engine. 43 head of cattle roamed freely across the 4-lane highway, their eyes wild with terror as they dodged the traffic that had backed up for miles in both directions. Sheriff Holloway Briggs was coordinating with state police trying to establish a perimeter, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Several cattle had already been hit by vehicles, and the remaining animals were becoming increasingly agitated. The air filled with the sound of honking horns, shouting voices, and the frightened bellowing of confused livestock. We need to get these animals contained before someone gets killed, the sheriff called out as Baxley, Maverick, and Cordelia arrived on the scene. But every time we try to approach them, they scatter further into traffic. Baxley surveyed the situation with a professional eye. Under normal circumstances, this would require a dozen experienced cowboys, helicopters, and hours of dangerous work. Even then, they'd likely lose several animals and possibly human lives in the process. Where's Sage? Cordelia asked quietly. Maverick pointed toward the horse trailer they'd brought. Still loaded up, I wasn't sure if we should let him out, Cordelia said with quiet authority. Trust me. As Maverick lowered the trailer ramp, Baxley felt his stomach clench with apprehension. The old horse emerged slowly, his head raised high as he surveyed the chaos before him. For a moment, Sage stood perfectly still, as if processing the enormity of the situation. Then something extraordinary happened. Sage began to move toward the highway with purpose and determination that defied his apparent age and condition. As he approached the scattered cattle, a strange calm seemed to emanate from him, rippling outward like circles on a pond. What the hell is that horse doing? Sheriff Briggs demanded, but his voice carried more wonder than anger. Baxley couldn't. He was transfixed by what he was witnessing. Sage wasn't hurting the cattle in any conventional sense. He was communicating with them on a level that transcended normal animal behavior. The terrified animals began to respond to his presence, their wild eyes focusing on him with something that looked remarkably like recognition. One by one, the cattle began to move toward Sage, not running, not being driven, but choosing to follow him with an almost reverent obedience. The horse positioned himself at the center of the highway, and within minutes the scattered livestock had formed a perfect circle around him. "This is impossible," muttered one of the state troopers, his voice filled with awe. But Sage wasn't finished. With movements so subtle they were barely perceptible, he began to guide the entire group off the highway. The cattle followed him like iron filings drawn to a magnet, their earlier panic completely forgotten. Traffic officers and emergency responders stood frozen, watching in stunned silence as the old horse accomplished what should have taken hours of dangerous work. "Sweet Mother of God," Sheriff Briggs whispered. "In 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like this." Within 20 minutes, every animal was safely contained in a nearby field. The highway was clear, traffic was flowing again, and what could have been a deadly disaster had been averted by a horse that most people would have considered worthless. As emergency crews began their cleanup, Baxley found himself standing beside Cordelia, both of them watching Sage graze peacefully among the cattle he'd just saved. "How?" Baxley asked, his voice barely audible. "Some gifts," Cordelia replied, "can't be explained. They can only be witnessed and accepted." Maverick approached them, his young face glowing with pride and wonder. "Mr. Thornton, the sheriff wants to know if Sage is available for other emergencies. He says he's never seen anything like it." Baxley looked at the boy, then at Cordelia, then back at the remarkable horse that had just redefined everything he thought he knew about the natural world. "That," he said slowly, "is not my decision to make." All eyes turned to Sage, who raised his head from the grass and looked directly at them. In that moment, Baxley could have sworn the horse nodded once, as if accepting a responsibility he'd always been destined to fulfill. The $1 horse had just proven he was worth more than Baxley's entire ranch, and for the first time in his life, the proud rancher felt genuinely humbled. 6 months later, Sage had become a legend throughout Montana and beyond. News of the highway incident had spread far and wide, bringing reporters, animal behaviorists, and curious visitors from across the country to Baxley's ranch. The old horse had participated in dozens of rescue operations, from finding lost hikers in blizzards to preventing stampedes during county fairs. But it was the change in Baxley himself that truly marked the transformation. The proud rancher who had once mocked Cordelia's gift now found himself working alongside Maverick to care for Sage, with a devotion that surprised everyone who knew him. He'd learned to read the horse's subtle signals, to understand when Sage sensed danger or opportunity, and to trust in abilities that defied rational explanation. "You've changed, Bax," Garrison Whitmore observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Sage work with a group of young horses in the corral. "Used to be you thought you knew everything about everything. Now you listen more than you talk." Baxley nodded, his eyes never leaving the horse. "Sage taught me that wisdom doesn't always come in the package you expect. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones you almost miss because you're too busy looking at the surface." That weekend, Cordelia returned for what she said would be her final visit. She was frailer now, moving with the careful steps of someone whose time was growing short, but her eyes still held their familiar spark. "I wanted to see how he was settling in," she explained as they walked toward the pasture where Sage was resting beneath an old oak tree. "He's not just settling in," Baxley replied. "He's transforming this place. Hell, he's transforming me." Cordelia smiled. "That's what I hoped would happen." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the horse who had brought them together. Finally, Baxley spoke the words that had been weighing on his heart for months. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "What I said at that auction, the way I treated you and mocked your horse. I was wrong. I was cruel and ignorant, and I'm sorry." Cordelia's weathered hand touched his arm gently. "Mr. Thornton, you gave me exactly what I needed that day. How do you figure that? You showed me that Sage had found his purpose. Your mockery didn't hurt me. It confirmed that my horse was needed here, with people who could learn from him. Maverick saw his potential immediately, and you, well, you learned the most important lesson of all, which is that true value isn't determined by appearance or first impressions. It's revealed through actions, through character, through the ability to touch other lives in meaningful ways." As if summoned by their conversation, Sage approached the fence, where they stood. He looked older now, his movements more deliberate, but his one good eye still held that ancient wisdom that had first unsettled Baxley. "I need to ask you something," Baxley said to Cordelia. "How long do we have with him?" Cordelia's expression grew thoughtful. "Sage will be here as long as he's needed, but his time is not infinite. When his work is done, he'll let you know. And then you'll have to let him go just as I did." That evening, as the sun set over the Montana plains, Baxley sat in the pasture beside Sage, something he'd taken to doing regularly. The horse's presence had become a source of comfort and wisdom, a reminder that the world held mysteries far greater than his own understanding. "You know," he said to the horse, "I used to think I was pretty smart, built a successful ranch, made good money, had the respect of my neighbors, but you taught me that real intelligence isn't about what you know, it's about being open to what you don't know." Sage turned his head toward Baxley, and for a moment, the rancher felt that familiar sense of being truly seen, truly understood. "Thank you," Baxley whispered, "for everything." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Maverick joined them, the pasture, carrying a thermos of coffee, and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had found his true calling. "Reporters are coming again tomorrow," he said, settling down beside Baxley. "This time from some fancy magazine in New York." Baxley chuckled. "Let them come. Maybe they'll learn what we learned, that the most extraordinary things often come in the most ordinary packages. Or the most overlooked ones," Maverick added, reaching out to stroke Sage's neck. The three of them sat together in the peaceful darkness, man and boy and miraculous horse, bound together by a bond that transcended understanding. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, safe under the watchful presence of the $1 horse who had proven himself priceless. Baxley had learned the greatest lesson of his life, that laughter born of mockery could be transformed into wonder, that judgment could give way to humility, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected sources. The rancher who had once laughed at an old woman's $1 horse now knew that he had witnessed something truly unthinkable. Not just Sage's extraordinary abilities, but his own capacity for growth, redemption, and grace.